Thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to a fantastic day with you. We're kicking off a new tradition here this year with a little hosted breakfast with a panel, and we're doing it because, quite frankly, there's so much that we need to be talking about, and we had an opportunity to bring together an incredible caliber of speakers, and want to share some neat ideas with you. So the theme of this morning is a blockchain breakfast. We're thrilled to have Alan Wunschy. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah.
Perfect. From Blockchain Canada here as our moderator, and Alan was here for part of yesterday. He was there last night, and he's going to be with us for the rest of the day, I believe, today as well.
I do have a commitment.
Oh, are you going to be able to come back afterwards?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, his commitment and coming back. So we kind of sprung this on Alan last minute over the last couple weeks. So wanted to take him, take advantage of his network and his vast experience in the blockchain community here in Canada to kind of bring together a great panel to talk about how we can be applying blockchain to the problems that we're facing in the identity world. So without any further ado, I'll leave it to Alan to take the panel through a great conversation. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I am delighted to be here. What a great session yesterday. Identity is clearly at a great time in history, and I'm delighted to have a great set of speakers up here. I think we called it the Executive Power Breakfast or something, and this is definitely a power panel. So I look forward to having a great conversation, and why don't we kick things off? So before we do that, we're going to have a quick round of intros. Myself, we started Blockchain Canada a year ago because the discussion was very much around digital currency and Bitcoin and such, but there's so much more to this story. And blockchain has so many more applications. We're going to be talking about identity this morning, a really important piece of this. We will, so why don't we first begin with quick intros, please.
Sure.
So we have Colleen, Lisa, and Andre. So if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick intro and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Alan. It has been a great few days with all our colleagues across the country. And my name's Colleen Bolden. I'm here from the province of New Brunswick. I'm part of the Smart Province team in our province. In New Brunswick, the Premier put the gauntlet down, and he has decided that we will be the first digital society in North America. And that's no small challenge, but we're up for it. There's a number of initiatives at play, and obviously digital identity is a really important part of that. So I'm responsible for our digital lab as well as our digital identity program. So I'm happy to share a little bit about our journey in New Brunswick and some of the things that we're working on. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm Lisa Lunenberg from CIBC. I'm the Vice President of Enterprise Innovation, and my role predominantly, I think I'm getting too much. Is it too close?
It might be my mic.
Too close to Andre? My role at CIBC is to lead and support innovation that cuts across the whole organization, and innovation at CIBC is a fundamental priority. Our CEO is always talking about how we want to be out there being the most modern, convenient bank, and so my role is to help facilitate that. I work very closely with SecureKey on the digital ID initiative for CIBC.
Hi there, my name is Andre Boyson, and I'm Chief Identity Officer at SecureKey. I've been working on this consumer identity problem for the last decade or so across public and private sector. My goal is to tell stories about how we want to make this work as a society. So I work at DIAC and working with all of you as a collaborative community about working, how do we make this work together? What we've come to a conclusion in Canada, which is kind of unique in the world, is that digital identity is bigger than any single organization. And in Canada, we've figured out a way to collaborate, and each of us recognize how we can bring our strengths to this at the same time benefit, so we can, all of us, deliver better services back to our customers.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those intros. Clearly, we have the right people here in front of us this morning, so I'm really looking forward to hearing those insights. And yes, this is very much a Canadian story. We're here in Canada. We sometimes forget what great work we do, but I think it's very clear that the world is watching what Canada is doing in this space. We've got a collaborative environment of government, industry, and consumers are going to benefit at the end of the day, and we're going to dive right in. So why don't we just, I'm going to ask Lisa to kick things off with a little dive into why digital identity is important. So let's start with the broader context, please.
Yeah, sure. So digital identity is really kind of the last pressing issue to solve for in transforming digital experiences for our customers. And whether it's a consumer to business, a consumer to consumer, or a consumer to government transaction, there's a lot of friction today, and ID seems to be a fundamental piece of most of those interactions. And so I think a digital ID or coming to develop an ecosystem that supports a digital ID is a very important thing for all of our customers to remove that friction and transform to the next generation of the digital economy. And, I can't agree with you more in terms of, it seems like a simple thing, but when you think about the ecosystem, the participants and the participants' technologies and how they run their businesses, how complicated a thing this is to establish for a country, the way we'll get there, it has to be through collaboration and partnering in the private and the public sector, because everybody's bringing their own organization, their knowledge, what they want to accomplish for their customers, their risks. And I think you're seeing that in Canada, especially in the working with SecureKey. I mean, I'm part of an initiative with Andre, where as the banks were working on establishing a common kind of authentication and digital ID that we would host. And so as we look at that in the use cases, it's broad. And it has to be beneficial for all parties and everyone using that digital ID. And I think, when I step back, the most common goal of all entities, regardless of whether you're, using the digital ID or providing the digital ID, is privacy and security. And so everybody has those common interests. And I think if we work collaboratively and the Canadian standard is being set for that, we're going to get there.
Thank you. Colleen, can you give us the government perspective?
Sure.
The collaborative side of that.
Absolutely. So I sit on the Identity Management Subcommittee and several other committees, obviously trying to stand up the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. So this is a really, really important component. Governments fundamentally need to be able to trust one another. But I'll take you back maybe just a little earlier in our journey. The impetus for New Brunswick to get engaged in creation of a digital identity really came from our private sector. So some of our information technology folks had gone to Estonia. They had seen what had happened with the transformation there. Came back, 25 folks went, private sector, both parties, as well as senior executives on the political as well as the deputy minister level came back. The vision was struck for the Smart Province Initiative. So open data, no big surprise. The digital lab to strike innovation and accelerate the development of new products and services that the private sector could then partner with us to market to the world. Digital identity and the open data work are fundamental components of that. We can't do this alone. We know that. So we're building the foundational components, but we, from the beginning, partnered with the private sector. So SecureKey has been working with the province for a number of years. We've worked and looked across the country and around the world at the models. We know we need to do this in an ecosystem perspective because we need it to work. And we need it to work not just across the country, but around the world. And it's not new that identity and access management is the top issue for the information technology industry and the growth of all industries in Canada. So this is one of those foundational components that we've just got to get it right. And once we do, we will be able to build products and services that we can then take to the world, including our identity solutions. So it's absolutely critical.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Andre, bringing you into this, you're the Chief Identity Officer, and you probably think a lot about the privacy aspects. Privacy's a worldwide concern. So does privacy really matter in this context, and how does it matter? How do you think about it? And does it take a second seat to security, for example?
So yeah, great question. I'm going to answer that question, but I want to just build on what both Lisa and Colleen have said. In a perfect world, I wouldn't need digital identity at all. I'd be able to go to CIBC, say my name's Andre, and I want in. But that's not the world we live in, because what happens is the sock puppets stand up and try and fool CIBC into thinking they're Andre too. And so financial harm comes from that. And so the truth of the way the internet is built today is it's built to keep crooks out. It's not designed to let customers in. And so we're in this world where we have week after week, breach after breach, and every time we have a breach, we have to change our security protocols to make it that little more secure. And every time we tighten down the screws, it's that much harder for the customer to get in, and that's kind of where we are today. And so what we need to do is get to a world where it's easy for customers and hard for crooks. And so that's what digital identity is all about, is making it easy for me to get to CIBC or New Brunswick or anywhere else I want to go on the internet and prove my identity in an easy way, in a way that a crook can't. So that's what this is really about, is really just making it easy for consumers. And so in the course of doing that, we don't want to construct a surveillance state where someone gets to follow me around the internet in the course of getting this certainty that Andre's Andre. So how do we then, at the same time, and making it easy for me to do what I want to do, not be in a place where somebody is standing over my shoulders and following me around the internet and having a super set of data that, from a privacy point of view is not great, but also becomes a new honeypot for the crooks to go after. And so this is this idea that we've got to really just get it down to the minimum set of data that's needed to do the transaction, while at the same time make sure the data is being presented as trustworthy. And that's another element of risk and security. So one of the challenges today, because the internet is based on questions and knowledge, the way we get business certainty is by asking a long list of questions, and that's how we get certain Andre's Andre. And the challenge with that approach is that it leads to breach risk. When I get breached, I've got this long file, and I have to remediate all of this data. And I also have a big duty of an apology to get things back right with Andre. And so this is where we are today. And so if we can get down to a smaller set of data and be certain that the data is true, then our breach risk goes down. And so this idea that privacy and security are actually at odds with each other is actually not true. And Ann Cavoukian has actually been a strong proponent of this area, saying we need positive sum privacy, not zero sum privacy. And so one of the things we see is if we can get better certainty on the data and we don't need as much, we actually take our breach risk down. Right? So that actually says that security is improved by having less data because there's less to control. We just need better certainty in the data we're given. So privacy and security actually reinforce each other.
Thank you. Colleen, as you think about it from a pan-Canadian perspective, and we think about again the context of working across, as you said, across jurisdictions. How does having this digital identity ultimately help governments work together? How will this benefit us in a broader context?
Yeah. Well, it's a big transition time for governments around the world. We don't have enough support, we don't have enough budget, we can't act fast enough because we're government. We've got broad, diverse stakeholders. So even if you're moving fast, it feels like you're moving slow sometimes. Okay. So the context hasn't really changed. But probably what has changed is the expectations of our citizens. So while the innovation is happening in the Googles and the Amazon and all of that, our customers are looking at those as the new standard. The reality for governments is we have a whole lot of legacy systems that we need to bring into the new age and modernize. But we also have I think, Andre, you like to use the 130 passwords. Well, I've got a drawer, I'm sure everyone else does, and as soon as I found out that the apps were scooping my contacts, well, then I went to paper, and that's not working either. So how do we reconcile all of these high expectations around high customer service, speed and convenience, but yet there's not a day goes by that you don't hear about the latest hack, who's been breached. My kids are, one of their friends, their bank account was compromised. So it's happening. We know it's happening. We know that the crooks are better funded, faster. They're taking a lot of profits and they're reapplying them into R&D and doing better than we can on that side. So why is it important in the Canadian and the world context? We fundamentally can't move the economy forward and be more efficient in our service delivery, reduce the friction, improve the customer service and ease of use if we can't get the key into the house right. So we've got to get the key into the house right. And the key into the government services world is identity and access management, which is the digital identity. I have to be able to trust what's happening in BC and that the identity's been proofed. They need to be able to trust that I'm adhering to standards and holding ourselves accountable. We need to look at how we set up this certification and you know, blessing across the country. And we need to be working internationally to understand the new threats, to work to best practices, and to really make sure we're focused on the right things first. I think there is 25 years of work ahead of us in a blink, and it's a fascinating space, but we will not get there alone.
Thank you. And so Lisa, from a CIBC perspective, consumer adoption, how is that going to be, picking up on what Colleen just said, I mean, I imagine CIBC is all about consumer convenience and such. So how do you tell the story?
From digital
standardized digital identities, working across jurisdictions, across the Canadian environment, and the CIBC context, working with the other banks, for example.
Yeah, and I come from many years of experience in the payments world, right, where there's a sender and a receiver, and I always think about, you know, Interac and payment networks were successful because they had common standards, they had common brands, and everybody knew the minimums and exactly what to do from an ops regs perspective. And so when I think about, you know, an ecosystem where multiple parties are involved, you know, merchants, banks, telcos, governments, everybody needs to be working from the same standards and operating principles. And if you have that all common, then that actually helps accelerate innovation and accelerate things faster. And I've seen that time and time again in kind of establishing new payment schemes or payment networks. And so the faster you can get to that commonality, even in the consumer experience of how we use a digital ID across all of our different, you know, government, telcos, commercial entities, if we all use it the same, that's a very important adoption characteristic as well in terms of accelerating adoption. And so I couldn't agree more. I think the faster that we get to these common standards and common approaches around how we're going to do it for our customers and use it in our own organizations, the faster the adoption will be as well.
Okay. And Andre?
So one of the things that's interesting to me is when we look at how we do street identity or paper identity today, it's already based on collaboration. When I go to a particular destination service, whether it's government, bank, or anything else, they make the rules about what it takes to get me into their service, what it means to them to be entitled. And when I go to Service Ontario as an example, they might say you have to get a health card, you could have a government-issued ID with a photo and something that proves where you live. And so then I look at my life and say, well, I'm going to bring my passport and my TELUS bill because that kind of meets the requirement. When you show up, you might bring your passport and your CIBC bank statement. So there's a plurality of providers. So that's kind of cool. What's missing in the current model, however, is that we can't verify the claims in paper identity are true. So the CIBC can't verify the Ontario driver's license is real. They're just looking at a plastic card. They look at the hologram and they do their best assessment and decide that it's good enough. When Service New Brunswick looks at a CIBC bank statement to prove where I live, they're looking at it, and so they make their best assessment that this is real. So there's no way to verify. Clever users can mock a fraudulent driver's license or Photoshop their document to get into the service that they're trying to get to. So that's kind of what's missing, is we have no way to trust the integrity or prove the integrity of the documents we're being presented. The second thing is that we're, in a lot of cases, when we use these paper documents, we're over-answering questions. And then when we use the driver's license to get into a bar, we're giving away a lot more info than we bargained for. When Service New Brunswick wanted to know where I live, they just needed my address, but they're getting my last 30 days of transactions, so we're over-answering questions. So it's only on the internet where we have this problem where every web service is an island and acts by themselves. And so if we can already bring what users understand about how real-world identity works and what is already common business practice to accept multiple sources from other parties when they do a transaction, if we can bring that model to the internet, but increase the integrity and increase the privacy, I think we'll be in a better place. And so this is what this whole ecosystem story is about, is bringing what's common and understood by business and consumers already, but adding better data integrity so that we can trust the data is of higher quality, and also increase the privacy, so we restrict the information being shared to solving the business question being asked. And so that's how we're going to get this model and this ecosystem play going, is bring consumers along so that they understand what's going on, and more importantly, fit into what is already common business practice rather than trying to invent something new.
I couldn't agree more. And I was going to ask to unpack this a little more. So maybe both Lisa and Colleen, as you think about the whole collaborative approach, what roles are your organizations taking in moving towards a standardized digital identity? So do you have a particular sweet spot in terms of what the banks are bringing to the table and what the government's bringing to the table? So it's not about who's best positioned necessarily to do it, but it is about what do you bring to the table in terms of the standardized approach.
Yeah. And I think, as a bank, we are a risk management institution, right? And I think from a brand trust of the general Canadian population, people love to hate their banks, but they trust their banks. And so our core competency is around risk management. And so in terms of contributing to kind of the digital ID ecosystem, I think we play a key role in that for customers. I mean, we touch every Canadian. Every Canadian has, majority of Canadians have an online or a mobile banking password, and we have an established relationship with them, and we have authentication practices and processes in place to make sure that we can verify people to do what we want them to do or what they want to do. And so I think as banks, we add the authentication and trust piece of helping consumers know that their data is sound, it's with the bank, it's being hosted and held at the bank, and through some of the blockchain, and then we'll probably get there, technologies that allows that to reside with the bank, right? And so people, in a digital economy, digital world, are concerned about pieces of their information being everywhere. I think that most Canadians fundamentally trust banks to hold their information and not, and safeguard it for them. And I think a lot of the new technologies in blockchain and the pieces that are being put in place just allow for that to be upheld and continue into a digital economy. And I don't see that role changing really from a bank perspective.
I think on the government side, well, fundamentally, again, our approach is a propensity to yes. So our digital lab states that we will create this accelerator program that allows us to test, and that's what we're doing. We're in the middle of a proof of concept on our digital ID program. So we want to test new products and services. We want to look at how they will be complementary to help accelerate the delivery and efficiency and cost effectiveness of government services. So blockchain is one of those new technologies. HP, Intel, IBM. The list is long of those that are experimenting. FinTech obviously is an area on the payment side where there's great opportunity. The way that we're going to look at it, and I wish governments trusted us, as our citizens trusted governments as much as they trust the banks in Canada, but that's not typically the case. We have probably a void of trust in government and a real opportunity to find creative ways to rebuild that. And identity and the work of DIAC in this industry could very well be one of those opportunities that just don't come along very often. And Canada positioning itself in a way that we create technologies that can be trusted, that allow us in a way that is distinct from other countries or that leapfrogs other countries. I kind of like that Canada First stuff, you know? I don't know,
Okay.
it rolls off my tongue rather nicely. So, you know, I'm all in on that side. And so that's the approach we're taking in New Brunswick. We really want to understand this new space. Obviously, selfishly, we're going to leverage it and use it to do what we need to get done. And we're going to partner with the best to get there.
Perfect. Perfect segues into blockchain. So, Andre, on the hot seat here. Why blockchain? Why the blockchain architecture? And you know, as you help us understand why blockchain was chosen as the next architectural component to digital identity, talk to us about privacy. Are there concerns about, you know, right to be forgotten information when we have an immutable ledger in terms of blockchain transactions and such? So can you help us unpack that a bit?
Sure, thanks. So one of the things that we've done here in Canada that's actually been really recognized on the world stage is the service we stood up with the banks to serve the government of Canada. So the idea that I could use my bank account to get to government when I want to see my tax information or my benefits information. And when the RFP first came out, the service called for the banks to produce an anonymous number, and then the service job was a very simple task to give that number to the government agency. That was what the request was in the RFP. And when we looked at that at SecureKey, we said, hey, like there's a better way here. And we said that maybe if we could limit how much information the counterparties could see of each other, that would actually help with consumer adoption of the service. So we invented this notion of triple blind privacy, which says when I use my bank account to get to government, the bank does not get to see my online destination. They don't get to see whether I went to tax or health or whatever. The government in its place doesn't get to see that I came from CIBC or TD. They know I came from a tier 1 bank in Canada and not which one. And then network operator, SecureKey, we don't have any personal identifiable information. So what that says, triple blind privacy says that none of the transaction participants got a complete picture of the user journey. And that innovation or addition to the service turned out to be a key element of the commercial success and consumer adoption. And so what's important to understand about the service that we have today is it is authentication only. There is no identity information in it. So as we turned our mind to solving this registration problem to make the service even more adaptable by other services and how to make it easy for consumers to prove their identity in addition to get access, we were stuck with the challenges. You know, doing triple blind identity was going to be a much harder problem. If you had a broker in the middle who could see the identity data, then this triple blind notion got broken. And so we wrestled for a long time on how to do this. And so we thought about how we might be able to do it with PKI, and PKI infrastructure would have worked pretty well. The challenge was how to implement blinding when the counterparties have to see the other guy's signature. And so we could have had an escrow agent stick on the side, and they would actually do the key exchange so we could blind the endpoints to each other. But it was going to be an operational hairball trying to orchestrate, and then if we ever had a problem trying to put it all back together, it was going to be really, really hard. And so what we saw, the engineering team at SecureKey saw with blockchain is we had a way now to implement triple blind identity. And so this idea that if I'm going to take my CIBC information to prove who I am to New Brunswick, in the course of doing that, I don't want CIBC seeing all the places I'm going on the internet because that doesn't really help me with privacy. And New Brunswick in its place shouldn't really know that I bank with CIBC necessarily. So what we've figured out how to do with blockchain is to implement triple blind identity. So when I use the service and I sign up with the service and I use CIBC as my anchor, I'm going to create a digitally encrypted bundle of my information with CIBC where it's going to stay there until I decide to share it. What we're using blockchain for is that when we create that bundle at CIBC, CIBC will produce a hash or a digital hologram that we stick in the blockchain. And so that just sits there until I decide I want to share it with New Brunswick. Sometime later when I go over to New Brunswick and I'm trying to sign up for maybe changing my address or registering to vote or whatever, I can actually direct CIBC to send my information to New Brunswick. And in the course of doing that, we're going to send one key from CIBC and one key is going to come from my phone. New Brunswick gets 2 keys now, and they can put those 2 keys back together and decrypt the bundle that came from CIBC. What's cool about that model now is New Brunswick knows that it came from a tier 1 bank, but not which bank. CIBC knows that I released my information to somebody, but they don't know who I gave it to. And the network operator, SecureKey, we don't run any of the blockchain information or ledger nodes ourselves, so we can't see it either. So we've now figured out how to do triple blind identity, and so this is why blockchain is so important. It does three important things. The first thing is it's allowed us to implement triple blind identity, so that's really cool. The second thing, it addresses that issue I talked about we have with paper identity today, which is the integrity of the information. So now when CIBC has written information into the blockchain, we have a hash that can be examined by New Brunswick so they can verify that the information hasn't been altered. And they also know it's being presented by the person it belongs to. And so that's the first thing, or sorry, the second thing is we get this data integrity. And the third thing it gives us is resiliency. One of the criticisms that gets leveled against broker models around the world is now you have a single point of failure. Somebody could do a denial of service attack on Concierge or Connect.gov or UK Verify and take the network down. And so now we're using blockchain. We have distributed ledgers. All the endpoints can actually have their own independent copy of the assertions of what's happened in the blockchain, the integrity. And so the benefit of that now is that if you want to take down the network, you've got to take down all the banks in Canada and all the provinces and all the telcos, and that's a much taller order. And so this adds additional resiliency and reduces a single point of failure issue. And so that is why blockchain is important for implementing identity in Canada.
Really appreciate that. You know, it's difficult to understand initially how the challenge was the triple blind, and now how it's implemented. And being in the blockchain space, I still always, kind of appreciate that kind of level of, how is it unhackable, for example, potentially, much less hackable anyway. So, those are obviously important parts of this. Part of this discussion is the privacy piece as well. So, Lisa, Colleen, which you may want to pick up on this, the kind of the right to be forgotten elements. I mean, if we start to put all of this information into an immutable ledger, are you thinking about those things for your clients and customers and citizens?
I'll jump in on this one. Yeah. Obviously, Lisa's regulatory framework is distinct from mine, but I think we kind of are big brother on that too. We can't forget the industries that we function in, the roles that we have to play in those, and the regulations that affect them. So when I think about that question that you've just posed, I think about, well, what specific regulations apply to what industry? And, is there a right to forget that's built into that industry?
Right.
So someone goes bankrupt and, whatever. So what are the roles? I think that question is a really important one. Maybe it'll be solved, the fact that those records are held, maybe it'll be solved in a different way for the industry that needs different regulations. So I don't think you can take a blanket statement and say that's what's going to work. I think it really is very specific to the industries you're functioning in.
It's interesting when I work with my technology leads in the bank that, on blockchain and the SecureKey deployment, the first thing they say is this is the most secure private way of doing this. So that's of great comfort to me. And I think the fundamental, the distributed ledger and how it allows for the verification and the trustworthiness of parties is an important part and an element of that. And from a privacy perspective, I mean, a solution that leverages a technology like blockchain is important because there's no data out there to be compromised. Like it's housed with the bank or it's housed with the other party providing the data, and so it's not increasing the risk around of throwing more data out there, right? The other benefit is Andre talked about this earlier, is that now we're working in a digital world where the client can consent at every time to release the data to the person that they want to release it to. So nothing happens, like there's no, general consent where we're going to send it. Every time a customer wants to send data or wants that interaction, they authorize it. And so from a privacy by design perspective, that is a very comforting thing for a consumer. I know as a consumer, it's like, yeah, I only want to give this to that party and that's it. And if you think about the physical world today, like anybody who, I don't know if nobody's probably under 19 here, but you go to the LCBO and you show your digital, your driver's license, they're getting a whole bunch of information they don't really need, right? So the digital way of delivering data to the third party that requires it can be much more streamlined and much more private. And I think that's an important part and a new world of privacy that I think it actually contributes to helping, consumers control the data that third parties get. So from a banking privacy perspective, you're right, privacy is one of the most important things to our organization, and making sure that we don't compromise that in any way, and look for solutions that actually help protect it. And I think what we're seeing in kind of a digital ID blockchain world, it's the utmost in privacy enhancing.
Okay.
I'll just build on what Lisa's saying on one other point that's critical. Our vital stats offices across the country take the protection of that information very seriously. Obviously, that's baked into the Pan-Canadian Trust framework, but the protection of personal data and the validation of ID from our vital stats offices and in these new technologies is going to be critical. And that's an area where privacy, security has to be paramount. And there's legal restrictions, just like on the fintech side, of what can be shared, how it can be shared. And the new world out there where, I'm sure all your colleagues and friends are hitting yes, it drives me crazy when, the flashlight app wants everything but your firstborn, to allow you. And even Air Canada, as I came on Rouge back across the country by mistake, I'll never do that one again. There's nobody in here on Air Canada. I was like this, and that the screen was here, but in fact there was no screen because it was Rouge. They wanted my friggin' driver's license. Just what was I going to do? Jump off the plane? Like they knew
For
where
the
I was
iPad,
on
yeah.
the plane. There was only 300 of us or whatever it was. But they wanted my driver's license, and they wanted to hold on to it. So I sat there, okay, what's the risk that they got a copier back there and some guy, your brain is in this space now. So you think about privacy and what we're doing on a daily basis to enable services and what we're saying yes to. Again, it drives me crazy. I think we can do a lot better. And I think we have to be mindful that just because we're going in this electronic world, that isn't an underpinning that we have to be absolutely focused on, and it has to be there.
I think what you just did was bring the consumer, the citizen, the person into this, because ultimately this is what we're solving for, and we're going to help. I mean, there's so much in the way of frustration and concern about the way that our information is being used. So I think we've tackled a number of different elements from the technology side, the consumer side. I was just going to open it up, and I mean, we've got a smallish group.
Sorry, Alan, I just want to do one more thing on the immutability thing before you do it.
And then we'll do Q&A,
Yeah.
because I think we've got about 10 minutes. We ran a little late, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I want to get back to your right to be forgotten and immutability. There are a lot of blockchain projects out there that are actually suffering or wrestling with how to solve that issue.
Yeah.
And as soon as you stick PII into the blockchain, the right to be forgotten is gone. It's a nuclear option. You've got to take down the whole blockchain to be forgotten. So this idea of putting PII information in a blockchain is a really, really bad idea. And so we distinctly went another direction with this whole idea of what we're doing in Canada, which is we're putting hashes of information in the blockchain. There is no PII there. And so that's how we're going to solve this issue. But there is a tension that's at play.
Yeah.
So what's happening is like you can express and assert your right to be forgotten, but your counterparty, like the bank, may have a duty to the regulator, FINTRAC, to keep your data for 7 years in case that we have to go back and investigate the transaction. So that needs to be reconciled too. So how do you assert your wish, but then have CIBC at the right time be able to enact your wish because they had to keep it for 7 years? And so we've got to figure out how to do that. And so one of the things we're working on at SecureKey is actually to solve that exact issue, is to force compliance of users' wishes and consents. And the way we're going to do that is take a page out of the music industry. So what music industry did is they wanted to enforce copyright, so they developed this whole concept of DRM, digital rights management. And the idea is that only people who are authorized who bought the music should have access to use it. Well, if we could apply that concept to your data so that you could give a license to your data to the counterparty, we can actually start to enforce your rights. So if you express your desire to be forgotten, CIBC will have as part of its smart contract to hold on to the data for the regulatory period that they're required to, but at the end of the period, your data will automatically cease to work. And so now we can start doing enforced rights management using DRM so that your right to be forgotten can be enforced.
That's a fantastic example, and thank you for bringing that in, because we have a challenge, and we're looking to other industries and other examples of how these challenges can be solved. So that's I think what we're going to get out. We're going to get this story out eventually, how innovative this country is, and the kind of challenges that we're doing and we're solving actually is really important. And I can contest, and I confide in you that at the international level, when I was at the ISO meetings recently, people have said Canada is leading the way in certain areas, and we'll look to Canada as one of these great collaborative kind of countries and solving big problems. So we should all be proud of what we're doing.